Shalom, welcome back. So, several weeks ago I mentioned that I had been working on something involving a book. And I've been working on it for several months, it may even be up to a year now. And initially when I started working on it, it wasn't something I necessarily was making for other people. It was something I was just making for my own information. And what that initially started out being was, as I run across text in the New Testament that was mistranslated, I would correct these. Like, I had my own copy of the New Testament, and I was correcting these mistranslations. The major one that I've discussed before on here, was the Greek word pisteo, which is usually almost always translated as believe, but it only means believe in the sense of believing a fact, like a piece of information. But when you talk about pisteo unto a person, that is not about just believing the person. That it's about believing in the person, believing they are who they say they are. It's about, if you believe someone's a king, you're going to be obedient to the king. And so essentially believing unto someone, it becomes now this meaning of obeying this person, following this person, doing what they tell you. And so the majority of the times that pisteo appears in the New Testament is in the Gospel of John. And the majority of the times it appears there, it should be translated as obey. So like Yeshua says that you should obey unto him instead of believe unto him. Now sometimes it does mean believe. So like if he were to say, if you were to say to somebody, hey, it's supposed to rain tomorrow, do you pisteo me? Well, that would be, do you believe me? Do you believe that it's going to rain? It doesn't mean, do you believe in me? Are you willing to obey me because I told you it's going to rain tomorrow? So that's one of the things that I was correcting as I was working through the text. Or if I learned that the earliest manuscripts read a certain way, and the translations that we have in English usually read with a newer version of this text, then I would change it back to the older version, because I would, believing that it's more trustworthy. There's the word in 2 Peter 3:16 that's usually translated as hard to understand, dysnoetos. But dysnoetos actually means nonsense, something that destroys sense. It's not something or destroys understanding. It's not something that's hard to understand. It's something that destroys your understanding of things. And so that's something that I updated in this personal copy of the New Testament that I had. So I've been working on this for quite a long time. And then I got interested in this thing called the Gospel of the Hebrews. And I first heard about it probably 8 years ago. And at the time, I had been in the Hebraic Roots movement for maybe 4 or 5 years, back when I was in that movement, that mindset. And I've been a Christian all my life. And my first thought when I heard about this gospel according to the Hebrews was, well, why have I never heard of this? Why am I, have lived this much of my life and been a believer and never heard of it? And if you've never heard of it, what it was is the Gospel of the Hebrews is the original Gospel of Matthew. It was written in Hebrew right after the ascension of Yeshua, and we no longer have a copy of it. It's been, lost to time, or more than likely it was wiped out by by the Constantinian Church, but for whatever reason, we don't have a copy of it. We have many references to it by the early church. Jerome quotes from it quite a bit. Jerome claims to have translated it into Greek and into Latin. We don't have those either. To me, it seems like it has been purposefully removed out of existence, that someone didn't like it. It didn't line up with what the Orthodox Christianity was teaching, and so it had to be eliminated. I don't know that we could possibly prove that, but that's really where my belief is. But the quotes that we do have from it, we have quotes from Epiphanius, we have quotes from Eusebius, we have quotes from Justin Martyr and from Jerome and from Origen, and these quotes demonstrate that there were things in the Gospel according to the Hebrews that reads different than it does in the Greek text of Matthew we have today. Typically, the language of the verses themselves a lot of times lines more up with what Luke says. So, from what I have gathered through my study of it, is it was laid out more like the Gospel of Matthew, but the text itself, the actual words of the verses, seem to line up more with Luke. And so the thought is that Luke probably, like Luke mentions that he got his information from various sources, and so possibly or probably one of those sources that Luke used was the Gospel according to the Hebrews. So it's been something I've been interested in for a long time. I studied it quite a bit several years back. Several people have attempted to take all the quotes we have from the Gospel according to the Hebrews, integrate it with the Greek Matthew, and try and reconstruct the Gospel according to the Hebrews. So that's one of the things I actually did in this book I was working on. And so, here's the table of contents from these various texts. And yes, I added my own little letter in there. I figure if I'm going to put this out there, I might as well, share my side of the story, what I believe, and so originally this letter started out being more like just an introduction to the text, kind of like what I'm doing now. I wanted to explain where some of these texts came from, what my thought process was on it, and what I did, because it involved compiling these various sources. It involved some translation work. It involved some editing. And so originally that letter for myself was going to be just a kind of an introduction. But it ended up reading more like an epistle, something like what James or Peter would have written. So rather than putting an actual introduction in the text itself, that's kind of what this video is. This video is my introduction, my explanation of this document. I do want to cover the Gospel of Hebrews more thoroughly, but I want to set it aside for a moment. So if you're watching this video because you want to get information about the Gospel of Hebrews, the Hebrews specifically, you might want to skip to later in the video, because I want to cover some of the other stuff in this document, and just my method and why I did things, what I used as my criteria for making a judgment call as to what I thought a various text should read, or how we wanted to preserve these various accounts from the early church. So I had several revelations while doing this. Like, I spent a lot of time working on this, praying about it. One of the revelations that I had, it was regarding this passage here in Josephus. And, well, maybe I'm off the wrong... Okay, here it is. So Josephus, this is from War of the Jews, I believe. But it says there are three philosophical sects among the Jews, and I've read this passage several times in various videos. The followers of the first sect is the Pharisees, the second is the Sadducees, the third, who holds to a severer discipline, is the Essenes, and these Essenes are Jews by birth. And so this is one of the passages I discuss in Who is Esau Edom. And by using other passages in Josephus and other places, we're able to figure out who these Pharisees are. The Pharisees were mostly these Edomites that were forcibly converted by John Hyrcanus to what we would probably call Judaism in the 2nd century BC. And so over time they became just known as Judeans or Jews. And so that's how Esau got kind of worked its way into being what they are today, the Jews. And but I wanted to just kind of take a moment and look at the way he introduces this. He doesn't say three religious sects. He says three philosophical sects. And this is something that I hadn't read this passage in quite some time. And it's like God reminded me of this one day. And what he told me was, sometimes it's helpful to think of what we would call religion as a philosophy for the purpose of understanding this something, and I'll show you what it is. So like today we've got Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And we generally think of those as religions, but for the purpose of this exercise, let's think of them as three philosophies. So let's take a clue from Josephus here, and if you think about it, really, like with Christianity, if we were to say it's a philosophy, then the religions would be, Catholicism, Methodist, Baptist, or whatever. Like, those are religions. But there's a way that we think, and the philosophy is shared across all these different religions, which in Christianity, it's generally the philosophy is that you're following whatever the text says. And if there's a text that you don't like, you got to find a text that you do like that contradicts it, and then you get to choose the text that you like. And I've seen this numerous times with people I have discussions with online or in the comments of my channel or whatnot. That's their philosophy. They may not like to accept it, they may not like to admit it, but that is their philosophy. If you can, my belief is whatever I can find a single verse in Scripture that supports my belief, then that's what my belief is. And if I can't find one that fits my belief, then we'll just mistranslate something so that it does. And that's kind of the way they do. Like, there's known mistranslations in the text. And when you present that information to someone who is in this Christian philosophy, modern Christian philosophy, they don't care. They don't care that pisteo is translated wrong. They don't care that, and it should be obey. They don't care about that. They don't care that Peter doesn't really say that Paul's stuff's hard to understand. He says Paul's stuff is a bunch of nonsense. But they don't care about that. What they care about is whichever translation that supports their personal theology. And if they can find a single verse that supports their theology, whether it's translated correctly or not, that's all they need. And you could present 100 verses that say something different. They don't care. They've got the verse. They think that verse is their loophole, or that's their get out of hell free card, or whatever you want to call it. That's the philosophy. Now, that philosophy actually comes, in a lot of ways, it comes from Judaism, because Christianity kind of sprung out of the same area as Jerusalem, or as Judaism did. And then you had this Pharisaical infiltrator come in named Saul of Tarsus, and so there was a philosophy of the early church, meaning James, Peter, John, Yeshua, and a lot of what Yeshua teaches, I think, could be even summed up as philosophy. And what the early church believed was that they wanted to follow what was God's desire, what was God's will. You see Yeshua speaking a lot about God's will. He does refer to text, but he refers to text typically to support following God's will. And that appears to be, after reading epistles from Peter, from James, the Clementine documents, that was their philosophy. We want to do God's will. And I think you can see that even in Josephus' description of the Essenes. I believe that Christianity, that when Yeshua was on the earth preaching in Judea, that his message resonated with the Essenes because that was closest to their philosophy. And so that's why the Essene quarter in Jerusalem became known as the Christian quarter in Jerusalem within 40 years of Yeshua's death, burial, and resurrection. So it wasn't really, I don't think, a war or a battle between religions in first century Judea. I think it was a battle of philosophy. So you had these Edomite Pharisees who had their own Edomite philosophy that they brought with them when they were forcibly converted by John Hyrcanus. And so there was this conflict, this dissonance between the philosophy of the early Hebrews, which was introduced to them by Moses, which involved doing the will of God and being obedient to God. And what you see a lot with Pharisaism, which today Pharisaism is no longer called Pharisaism, it's called Judaism. I've quoted the text before. I don't have it on the screen right now, but there's references to rabbinical persons saying that their religion of Judaism stems directly from the Pharisees, that they're the descendants of the Pharisees. And so you can find Sadducean doctrine within the prayer books of Judaism, but as far as the actual religious dogma itself is 100% Pharisees. And Pharisee is about finding loopholes. That's why you have all sorts of loopholes to, like, the Pharisees will come up with these, like, they'll invent commandments, say that this is what God wants, and then they create loopholes for the very commandments they just made up. That's why Yeshua, he's walking around Judea and he's being accused of breaking the Sabbath. Well, he didn't break the Sabbath. He broke their added rules about the Sabbath. And so you'll hear Christians sometimes accuse, well, Jesus broke the Sabbath. No, he did not. He's getting accused for healing of the Sabbath, but nowhere in the Bible does it say thou shalt not heal on the Sabbath. That was a Pharisaical dogma that they came up with, a commandment of men that they expected men to follow. So it's a mindset, a philosophy. The Pharisaical mindset, which comes from Edom, is about looking for loopholes. And so that goes back to Paul. Like, what kind of mindset was Paul sharing? He had that Pharisaical mindset. That's what he was raised in. That's what he embraced. That's what he wrote in his letters about. He's constantly twisting and misquoting the text to support his dogma. Like he quotes, the righteous will live by faith. But the text doesn't say the righteous will live by faith. It says the righteous will live by faithfulness, which faithfulness is obedience, right? So you see the philosophy of Paul, which is, to the Jews, I'm as a Jew, to those under the law, as one under the law, to those without the law, as one without the law. And he's basically whatever he wants to be at the time, whatever suits him, whatever is most expedient for him. Whereas, again, with James and Peter and John, their philosophy is we need to do God's will, whatever God wants. We need to follow the Messiah above all else, because the Messiah is the one who told us God's will. So it doesn't matter what Paul said to them, because all that matters to them is this is what the prophet of truth said. And whenever there was something the prophet of truth did not speak about, then they refer back to Moses. So it's a different philosophy, a different mindset. So now you have these Nazareans, and they've got this mindset, this philosophy of doing the will of God. And that's their number one priority, is doing the will of God. And they know the will of God because the Messiah told them. And anything that the Messiah didn't specifically tell them, they've got Moses to fill in the blanks there. And then they are spreading the message out throughout the first century Mediterranean area. And then they run into Greek and Roman people. And the Greeks and the Romans, they have their own philosophies, right? They, Plato and Socrates and men like that. So you have the philosophy of just doing God's will, and now it's backed up against this other philosophies, other mindsets that come from people like Plato and Pythagoras and all these other men that were philosophers. And you also have Paul mixed in there too, and so you end up with having this very much what I would say is like a Judaized, Pharisaical mindset that we have today in modern Christianity. It's like a mixture of pagan philosophy and Pauline Pharisaical philosophy, and the mindset and the philosophy of the early church, the Jameses, the Johns, the Peters, and even Yeshua himself is either put in the back seat or is completely thrown out. And in the same way that the Pharisees today have the Sadducean doctrines contained within their prayer books, they don't follow that. And it's just like, the Christians today, they have the Gospels within their Bible, but they don't follow the Gospels. They follow the founder of their religion, whom is Saul of Tarsus. So, I know it's kind of like a long way of like beating around the bush to get to this, but when people talk about Judeo-Christian values, I think that's what they're talking about, because Christian values and Judeo values should not, they don't meld well together. They're different. They have different values. But thanks to Paul, he was able to meld these two together, so that the thing that right now I think is leading the church astray is that they're stuck in this mindset of, I need to find a text that supports my side of the story versus I need to dig in and find the truth. So when I am now looking at these various texts we have, whether it's the mistranslated Greek or whether it is a more recent Greek text, and we know that the text originally read some other way, if you have this mindset of the Essenes and the Nazareans and this, we need to do the will of God, well, the will of God should be getting the text back to what it originally said, because that's as close as you can get to the days of the apostles. So that would mean that a mistranslation is not acceptable. A false or a text that's added later is not acceptable. So in a lot of ways, this book here that I put together, it's not meant to be a translation. It's not meant to be. There is no like one text out there that I would say is perfect to translate into some of the documents that are contained in here. What this is meant to be is not a translation, but a restoration. And that's the mindset that I went at this with. I want to restore the text to what we can reasonably believe was the way it read at the very earliest time. Because that's the mindset of the people who wrote it, was to do the will of God. This mindset of let's change the text to fit what we want, that came later. That's the philosophy or the mindset of the church in the 300s and 400s, after Constantine took over and they started throwing out stuff that didn't fit doctrine. And so in the last video I made, I talked about this whole like baptismal formula in Matthew 28:19, which today reads to go out and baptize in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And in that previous video, I went through and I showed you all these different references we have to before the year 300, and they were talking about baptizing in the name of Yeshua, not the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So if we're going to restore the text to what it originally read, then we would take that passage and we would say, okay, let's change it to what it originally read, which is what I did. So like if we go to John and just hit the reverse, verse 19, therefore go and make disciples of all Gentiles in my name, teaching them to adhere to everything I've commanded you. This is what we have the earliest testimony of what this verse originally read. So as an example, this is the way that I restored this verse, because what we're doing, or what the goal is to reconstruct the Gospel of the Hebrews. This is not about finding a translation from Matthew. And that also going along with that is what was the desire of the authors of these texts. So if you notice, I have the Nazarene Acts of the Apostles. Now, the Nazarene Acts of the Apostles is usually known as the recognitions of Clement. So why did I choose to title this the Nazarene Acts of the Apostles? Because the recognitions of Clement is something, if you just read that title, you have no idea what it is. It's a terrible title, and I think the reason it was titled that way was to make you not want to read it. Or a lot of times it'll say the pseudo-Clementine recognitions, which pseudo, means fake. So it's about they titled this work in a way that it makes it uninteresting. It doesn't tell you what it is, and you have no desire to read it. Now, if we were to click on the Nazarene Acts of the Apostles, I did put in here also known as the recognitions of Clement. But what this is I took the Nazarene Acts and I took it out of this archaic churchy language, translated it into modern English, and then we have a Syriac version, we have a Latin version. I basically took all these different versions and I used the different texts that we have of the Nazarene Acts to try to get the most accurate text versus based upon what the author intended. And a lot of this is really not any different than what you would find in the open source translation of the Nazarene Acts from the 1800s, except now it's in modern English. It's a lot easier to read, and there was a portion in chapter 3 that was not translated, so you didn't even have it available in English until now. Well, it's in here, translated from the Latin, supplemented with the Syriac, so that now we have this text, and we have it in a way that's readable, and not only that, but I changed the formatting on it, so now it's like in paragraph form, makes it easier to read. I did bold a few things that I wanted to highlight, but so now you have like a good translation of the Nazarene Acts, and you don't have to wade through this churchy, archaic sounding language. But now it's no longer known as the Recognitions of Clement. Now it's something that you might actually want to read, the Nazarene Acts of the Apostles. Also, you'll notice that we have the popular sermons of Peter here. Well, if you would click on the popular sermons of Peter, you'll see that this is the Clementine homilies. So the full title is Clement's epitome of the popular sermons of Peter, also known as Clementine homilies. So why did I go with this title, Clement's epitome of the popular sermons of Peter? Because this is the title that Clement gave to this. Clement did not title this the Clementine homilies. The church did, or whoever translated it did. And my theory is they did it. They translated it with this bland sounding titles because they don't want you reading it. I mean, if you've read across this text and the name of the text was the popular sermons of Simon Peter, would you be more likely to read that than the Clementine homilies? I think so. I would be. But if you'll notice, the Clementine homilies is always prefixed with this letter from Clement to James. Well, at the very end of the letter, Clement says, whence I, my master James, having promised, as I was ordered, have not failed to write in books by chapters the greater part of Peter's, discourses in every city, which have been already written to you and sent by himself, as for a token. And thus I dispatched them to you, inscribing them Clement's epitome of the popular sermons of Peter. This is Clement's title to this book. He didn't title them the Clementine homilies. However, I shall begin to set them forth as I was ordered. So he's sending this as like a second, like he's already sent it to James one time. Well, now he's sending him another copy of it. But I just restored Clement's title. He's the author of this text. This is the title he wanted. He tells you right here in his letter. So now I've corrected the title. It's now the Sermons of Peter, Book 1, Chapter 1, Book 1, Chapter 2, and so forth. And just like the Nazarene Acts is put into actual paragraph style, so it's no longer like one big, like you can see this is broken into 3 paragraphs. There's a little larger gap between the paragraphs. And I can tell you, as the person doing the editing and the translating and stuff on it, it made it much, much, much easier to read. There's times you'll have a dialogue where Peter will say something, then Simon Magus says something, then Peter says something, and they go back and forth. And all of that stuff was just all lumped into like one paragraph together. And it was hard to read. It was hard to figure out at times who was speaking. And when you break it out and you put it into paragraphs, the way a book would read, if you're reading a book and there's 2 people having a conversation, person A would say something, and it would be a separate paragraph, and then you have a new paragraph when person 2 spoke, and then person 1 responded. Well, that's another separate paragraph. And so that's the way I did with this. I put it into an actual paragraphs so that you could read it, and it could read easily, and you're not having to sit, like I would have to go back and reread chapters sometimes to figure out, okay, who's speaking, which person just said this thing, because it would be confusing the way they had it formatted. So, but now it's broken into separate paragraphs. It's much more readable. It's in modern English. So this is the Clementine homilies. The Didache is in here. I did restore the instructions for baptism the way I believe it originally read regarding baptism. You'll baptize in this manner after having first recited all these precepts. All these precepts would be the first 6 chapters. Baptize in the name of the Messiah, Yeshua, the Son of God, and living water. It no longer says Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, because we identified that as being a later addition. Also, we have footnotes. So I added footnotes to everything. So now, if you were to go into, I put the Gospel according to John. If you go into John, he has footnotes now to connect things that John says to things that Peter says in the Nazarene Acts. So now you can go, if you're reading the Gospel of John and you wonder what he's talking about here, and there's this footnote 148, well, now you can go over to the Nazarene Acts, book 8, chapter 34, and Peter actually addresses this. Like, he actually either refers back to this passage, or he adds a little bit more understanding to it, or whatever the case may be. So, and this is true of all of these documents. If there's something I translated differently than what most texts are translated, I have a footnote telling you that. And I'll tell you the Gospel according to the Hebrews that I did the restoration of, it has a lot of footnotes that go back to the Nazarene Acts and the sermons of Peter. And so this I think is a really cool feature, is because now if Yeshua made a statement, or in this case, here you have the Father speaking at Yeshua's baptism. Well, this is mentioned in Nazarene Acts, book 1, chapter 48. And so you can turn over in the Nazarene Acts there, and you can see what Peter has to say about that. Because whatever Peter says about it should be what Yeshua said about it. So essentially, this is what I've been working on. So some of the text in here is obviously going to be different than what you would be used to reading in the Greek Matthew, because it has the Gospel of the Hebrews text inserted in. And so this is something else I put together that that kind of goes along with this book that I did, but this actually gives you the sources. So like if you're reading if you're reading chapter 3, and there's a line of text in there that you don't recognize, we could go over to Matthew chapter 3 in this list, and all of the sources that we have from the references to the Gospel according to the Hebrews that are contained here, so you can see why I changed the text, because I'm inserting something that used to be in the Gospel according to the Hebrews, but it's not in our modern English translations. So like this chapter here, Matthew chapter 3, this is dealing with the baptism of Yeshua. And so here Epiphanius referred to the Gospel according to the Hebrews. And so these are the references from Epiphanius that deal with Matthew chapter 3 and the changes I made so that it restores the Gospel according to the Hebrews. For instance, Epiphanius says, and after it says many things, it states, when the people were being baptized, Yeshua came to and was baptized by John, and he came up out of the water, the heavens opened, and he saw the Holy Spirit of God in the image of a dove coming down and coming into him. So our Greek Matthew says it came and landed on him, but this says it actually came into Yeshua, the Holy Spirit. And there was a voice from heaven saying, "You are my beloved Son, with you I am well pleased, and today I have begotten you." And immediately a great light illuminated the place. When John saw this, it says, he said to him, "Who are you, Lord?" And again there was a voice from heaven to John, to him, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." And then it says, John walked to him and said, "I request you, Lord, you baptize me." But he prevented him, saying, "Allow it, since thus it is proper to fulfill all things." So I used this text from Epiphanius to restore part of the baptismal account of Yeshua in the Gospel according to the Hebrews. Now there's Cyprian also talks about the baptism. Jerome talks about the baptism. So Origen talks about it. So we had to synchronize all these different accounts to be able to restore it back to what it originally said. And so this is so any of these any of these quotes from the Gospel according to the Hebrews that I incorporated into my text of the Gospel according to the Hebrews, they're all listed here in the chapters where they are inserted. So when you run across it in the text, if you want, you can always refer back to this to see where it came from. It's not something I just made up out of thin air. It actually comes from a historical quotation that we have from someone like Jerome, who says, hey, in the Gospel according to the Hebrews, this passage actually says, whatever, and he tells how it reads in the Gospel according to the Hebrews. There's also marginal notes in some early Greek manuscripts of Matthew that tell us what the Gospel according to the Hebrews says. So, like, there might be a passage where in the Greek text it's given the Sermon on the Mount, and it comes to a particular verse, and there will be a marginal note, and it'll say, well, in the Gospel according to the Hebrews, this verse reads as this. And so, like, where Yeshua says, blessed are the poor in spirit, there was a marginal note that says in the Gospel of the Hebrews, it reads as, blessed are the poor. So the Gospel according to the Hebrews did not say poor in spirit, it just said poor, the same way that Luke reads today. There's some portions of Luke that contain what's called Semitisms, or like basically it's the Greek language used in certain parts of Luke indicates that it had a Semitic source, and so the theory is that these portions of Luke were probably copied out of the Gospel according to the Hebrews and translated very faithfully from Hebrew into Greek. So there's some things in the Gospel according to the Hebrews that are reconstructed that I use the text from Luke. And the Clementine recognitions, the Nazarene Acts, I'm trying to stop using these older titles. The Nazarene Acts and the Sermons of Peter, their quotations of Yeshua actually follow closer to what we know about the Gospel according to the Hebrews than it does the modern Gospel of Matthew. So after studying this out, I'm to the conclusion that I think that the author of the Sermons of Peter and the Nazarene Acts, I think that they were actually reading from the Gospel according to the Hebrews. So again, sometimes if the text in Matthew differed from the text in the Nazarene Acts, then I would go with the way it read in the Nazarene Acts. So all that is being said to just say, look, this is the method that I used to restore as faithfully as possible the Gospel according to the Hebrews. I've done videos in the past where I've talked about how the feeding of the multitude, where Yeshua has these bread and fish, and he distributes this food to the multitudes, and they have like baskets of leftovers. In the earliest accounts that we have, like multiple accounts, there's at least 5 different times where someone in the early church before the year 200 refers to that narrative, that story of him feeding the multitude. And they always talk about him feeding the multitude with bread, and the fish is never mentioned. You don't hear any mention of the fish until after the year 200. And like Eusebius has no understanding that Yeshua fed the multitude with fish. He believes he fed the multitude with bread. In fact, even Yeshua in the Gospel of Matthew, he actually refers back to the feeding of the multitude at one point, and he said, "Don't you remember when I fed these 2 different multitudes with bread?" And he doesn't mention the fish. So it's pretty clear that the fish were an addition. A lot of textual critics believe the fishes were added later. I went to a Catholic parochial school from 1st grade through 8th grade. And I remember sitting in 6th grade Bible class, and the nun was teaching us about the feeding of the multitudes, and she told us, matter-of-factly, there in the classroom, that all the references in the New Testament to fish were added after the fact. That they were added because she said that the early church, when they were being persecuted, they adopted the symbol of the fish as their symbol. And so, like, if somebody wanted to know if their friend was a believer, but they didn't want to ask because, they could get killed for being a believer themselves, they would take a stick and draw in the dirt the fish symbol. And if the other person was a Christian, then they would know that one another were Christians. Like, that's what she told us. But in the context of her telling us that, she matter-of-factly just said, yeah, all these stories about the fish, they're all added. And I remember being a kid and thinking, what? Like, being a kid, I didn't know enough to ask her, like, well, how do you know that? But yeah, so, according to Sister Mary Janice, the teacher of Sacred Heart parochial school, the fishes were all added. They were added after the fact. So when I restored the gospel according to the Hebrews, I removed the fish from the story because it wasn't in there. Epiphanius, talking about how the Ebionites use the gospel according to the Hebrews. He says that they've mutilated it because there's no mentions of Jesus eating meat, and they say that that all they do is eat bread, and that is basically portraying like this vegetarian Jesus. And so I'm like, okay, well, Epiphanius right there tells you that the gospel according to the Hebrews had nothing in it regarding them eating meat. So there's not many references to them eating meat. There's some of Yeshua's parables contain details of meat being added to them. So that stuff I've just edited out. But it's like the point is to try and restore the text to the way it read, to the way that historically we know that it read. Because people want to study this stuff, and study the mistranslations, study the various texts, study the stuff that's been added. And there's so many things that we know has been added, but no one wants to change it. No one wants to go and make the correction. One of the sources I used was this the original Gospel of Matthew by Stanford Reeves, because he studied this issue out about the Gospel according to the Hebrews, and he has this quote from Erasmus in it, which I love. Erasmus says, "You cry out that it's a crime to correct the Gospels. This is a speech worthier of coachman than of a theologian. You think it is all very well if a clumsy scribe makes a mistake in transcription, and then you deem it a crime to put it right. The only way to determine the true text is to examine the early codices." And this is a quote from Erasmus, who lived in the 15th and 16th century. And this to me, like, I kept going back to this quote and thinking, this is true. When I started out putting together this restoration of these texts and trying to come up with, I don't know if you would call it like a canon or what, but just trying to come up with a list of texts that I would deem to be trustworthy, that I think we could build doctrine off of based upon what the early church believed. I would think about this, and I would think, somebody should fix all these things. All these things that we know are wrong. All these mistranslations, all these additions to the text, someone should fix it. And one day, God just told me, He's like, well, aren't you somebody? And I was like, well, I'm nobody. Who am I to fix this stuff? It should be some theologian or some, expert in Greek or something like that. And God, He said, He said, son, they've had 2,000 years to fix it. How much more time are you going to give them before you realize they're not going to? And so this whole like conversation God had with me is true. I mean, at what point are we going to be like, okay, I'm tired of waiting on someone else to fix this stuff. It needs to be fixed. So I fixed it. And you may read the way I did it, and you may think, I think I could do better. Well, if you think you can, do it. Somebody needs to. Somebody needs to fix this stuff. So I get asked at least once a month. Somebody will email me and say, hey, can you recommend a good book for this, a good book for that? Well, okay, now there's a good book. Now, if you want, people who say, well, if you were to do a New Testament, what would you have done? Well, this is what I would have done. Oh, I just closed it. Let me get that back opened up. So, like, if I were going to do a New Testament, this is what I would have done. These are the letters I would have in it. I would have the Gospel according to the Hebrews, which we don't have anymore, so all we could do is restore it to the closest that we could. Gospel according to John, the Nazarene Acts of the Apostles, the Didache, the letter from James the Just, Peter's first letter, Peter's second letter, John's first, second, and third letter, the letter from Jude. There's a letter from Peter to James that we have as as prefix to the popular sermons of Peter. And then we have Clement's letter to James. And again, the popular sermons of Peter, the Revelation. And then I included Eusebius' story of the murder of James, because I believe it's an important piece of historical knowledge that we should all have. And many don't. So, some people have accused me of wanting to remove books from the New Testament. That's not true. I think we need to start from the ground up. I think we need to start again. We need to say, okay, if we're going to have the truth, if we want to follow the truth, then this is what I think we should have. I think we should have letters from the actual apostles that Jesus chose. I think we should have letters from James the Just, because he was the head of the church. I think we should have the Didache in there, because at least a portion of it was written by the apostles. And, Jerome, actually, he mentions the Didache, and he says that the Didache comes out of the Gospel according to the Hebrews. So this story of the two paths, there's the two paths, one of life, one of death. There's a great difference between the two. These first 6 chapters, a lot of this comes out of the Sermon on the Mount. This may have been the original Sermon on the Mount. So maybe he didn't start off with the Beatitudes, blessed are the poor, blessed are the, whoever. I think he may have started off with, there are two paths, one of life, one of death. And then he went on from there. So, all of this stuff, in my opinion, is important. And instead of wasting paper and wasting space for Paul in the New Testament, maybe we should just have our own document, the truth. And I didn't want to name it the New Testament, because let them have let the blind have the blind, let the dead bury the dead, let them have the New Testament. And so I wanted something new. I wanted something that connected to Peter and connected to Yeshua. And the rock of his sure foundation, I feel like it does that. Yeshua called Peter the rock upon whom he would build his church. These documents, it's very much Jesus-centric, and it contains a lot of teachings from Peter about what Jesus taught him. So, the Gospels, that's Yeshua. Peter's letters, of course, are Peter, but then you got Clement's Sermons of Peter, which is about 300 pages. And then you have the Nazarene Acts, which is about 300 pages. So you got about 600 pages of Peter teaching us about Yeshua, stuff that's not even in the Scripture. So this is what I've been working on. Something that Yeshua showed me, a little insight that I got regarding this Didache and these two paths, the one of life and the one of death. I've mentioned before in Isaiah. Where's Isaiah? Nope, I missed it. Well, actually, I can go this way. So Isaiah 28. I think it's around verse 19. So Yeshua tells us this parable about this house is built on the foundation of the rock. And the storm comes, and you got this house built on the rock, and you got this house built on the sand, and there's a destruction of the house built on the sand. And the same parable is mentioned in Isaiah 28, talking about this overwhelming scourge that passes through, and you'll be trampled down by it. It's using the same imagery that Yeshua did. But he mentions this covenant of death that these people have. He says, because you have said, we have made a covenant of death, and with Sheol we are in agreement. I've mentioned in previous videos that Sheol, when it's written in Hebrew, it is written exactly the same way as Saul. So, Saul of Tarsus, the Hebrew name of Paul, is spelled exactly the same way as Sheol, because Hebrew doesn't have vowels. Biblical Hebrew does not. It's all consonants, and so it's like if you were to write English the same way, and you were to put a BD on the page. BD could mean bed, bad, any word that any vowel you could put in between, like bud, B-U-D. And so you just have to know by reading the full sentence which one of those words was intended. If you saw a word that was BD, it could be bad, bid, bud, bed, and you'd have to know from the context. Well, it's the same way with Shaul or Saul and Sheol. So where Isaiah says we have made a covenant, that these people are saying we have made a covenant with death and with Sheol, it could legitimately also read we have made a covenant with death and with Shaul or with Saul. So this could actually refer to Saul. Like Saul made this fake covenant. This it's like he came up with his own gospel, and he changed, or he attempted to change the covenant that Yeshua established with his apostles. But what about this covenant of death? How could it be a covenant of death and with Shaul? And I mentioned in one of the previous videos, speaking of baptism, like you can see from the way Yeshua teaches about baptism, the way Peter talks about baptism, is a baptism unto life. But Paul describes it as a baptism unto death. Paul, if you really look at what he says in his letters, the moment of salvation, the moment of redemption came not at Jesus' resurrection, but at his death. So in Paul's theology, when Jesus died, he died to save the world. But in the theology of the apostles, the resurrection was the moment of salvation. The moment when Yeshua was vindicated, the moment when God the Father confirmed the covenant was at Yeshua's resurrection. So, Paul literally has this covenant of death. You're baptized into death. You're saved by Jesus' death. Whereas the apostles, their covenant's all about life. And Jesus' covenant's all about life. But also, in the Didache, there are two paths, one of life and one of death. There's a great difference between the two paths. I believe that this covenant of death is the path of death. It's a theme in the Didache. And according to Jerome, the Didache, it comes from the gospel according to the Hebrews. So here's death's way. That the way of death is this. First of all, the road is evil, fully cursed with murders, adulteries, lustful desires, fornications, theft, idolatries, fortune-telling, sorceries, looting, lying, hypocrisy, swindling, craftiness, pridefulness, malice, stubbornness, greed, filthy speaking, envy, impudence, pride, and boasting. Paul's probably the most boastful person I've ever had the displeasure of reading. This is the covenant of death. The Didache unlocks the understanding of Isaiah 28. Another thing with this differences of philosophy that just occurred to me is in the video I did on baptism, one of the passages on baptism also mentioned about how eating dead flesh, it would open you up to demonic possession. And I just mentioned in the video that, and I've done multiple videos on the whole subject of vegetarianism being what was taught to the early church. Just mentioning it, I mentioned it one sentence, oh yeah, and so we've already covered that. We've covered it in past videos about how the early church was vegetarian, and we have all these references from early church fathers that the apostles didn't eat meat. And now I said in the video that I had done earlier videos on that. And in fact, I've got a whole playlist. In fact, since I'm mentioning it, we can go right there and I can show you. Now, granted, at the time I said that, I didn't have this playlist. I just made it the other day, so I'm not trying to say anything about there being a playlist, but there are videos. I've done multiple videos about this subject. And in those videos, it shows you the historical references. It shows you all the quotations saying, so if you go to my channel, go to playlists. Did Jesus teach his followers to eat a vegetarian diet? Right here is a playlist. And so you guys can, go in here, pause it. But all these videos.
Hello, welcome back. So I'm going to make a video.
So all these videos on the subject of vegetarianism. And some of them are pretty easy to figure out what they're about. Was Jesus a vegetarian? My case for Nazarene vegetarianism. And so on. All these videos deal with what the early assembly was told to eat. But I mentioned it one time in this video on baptism. Now, back to these three philosophies. If you have the philosophy of you want to do what God's will is, and I mentioned that there are other videos, then I think if you had that mindset, you probably would have went to my channel, went to my videos, maybe did a search for vegetarian, and you could have found at least these two videos on vegetarianism just by going to my channel. But some people, instead of going and looking into this themselves or asking me, hey, you said you have some videos on it, can you show me those videos? And there were some people that asked that. But there were also some people who, found a verse. Well, it says right here Here in Leviticus it says we can eat this or that or whatever. He told Noah you can eat everything that moves or whatnot. So it's these two mindsets. Like, do you want to do what's pleasing to the Father, or do you want to look for a gotcha verse? Because I don't care about gotcha verses. Because we've got the historical information from the early church. And so it's easy to determine what God's will is. So, like, you can go to, if you were to go to Epiphanius, the Panarian, he talks a lot about the Ebionites and what they believed. And he tells you the Ebionites would not eat flesh. And they said it was because Jesus told us not to. Their gospel, according to the Hebrews, described Yeshua and the apostles as not eating meat. So, for me, that trumps the gotcha verse. Because I'm not in that mindset. Like, that's not my philosophy anymore. It's not a philosophy of I want to find a verse that allows me to do what I want to do, and I'm going to hold this one verse up as proof. Because there's both types of verses out there. There's verses that tell you God implemented vegetarianism, and then there's verses that say you can eat meat. First page of your Bible, Genesis, I think it's Genesis 1:29, tells you that God gave us a diet of vegetables at the beginning. So, so that's a gotcha verse, right? I mean, it tells you plain and simple. When God created the world, His desire was that we ate vegetables, that we ate green plants. So it's the two mindsets, the two philosophies. Do you want to just do what God wants, or do you want to study a matter out and do what He wants, or do you want to just look for a gotcha verse and then you don't have to listen? And so, like, if there's a video on, like, I've noticed that people like to argue the point on videos where I'm not talking about vegetarianism. I just mention it in passing. Like, talking about baptism, I mention it in passing that the early church didn't eat meat. They don't like going on these videos like, was Jesus a vegetarian, where I show you sources, or any of this other stuff where I actually give you the sources you can look up and confirm for yourself. Again, it's about two philosophies. You're going to study a matter out, or you're going to look for a gotcha verse to get what you want. So I said at the end we would talk about the gospel according to the Hebrews. So I guess we can move into that topic now. So, like, if we go here, gospel according to the Hebrews, the way that I followed the method that was employed by this gentleman here, Stanford Reeves. Here is his books. Yeah, his books are on Google Books. You can buy them there's 3 volumes rather. There's 3 volumes. They're $10 each. You really only need the first, if you're wanting to see how the gospel according to the Hebrews could be reconstructed, you really only need volumes 1 and 2. So $20, and you can get his information. I followed this to some extent, but what he came up with is not the same as what I came up with. A lot, like most of what he did, was he used he used all the sources that I showed you guys that I have, the sources for the gospel according to the Hebrews, and he also used, we do have several copies of a Hebrew Matthew, but it's a Hebrew Matthew that's very similar to our Greek Matthew. So he color-coded his sources, this Mr. Stanford Reeves. This is his volume 1 of his book. This color here, this blue color, this comes from Hebrew copies of Matthew, like the Shem Tov. So if you've been around the Hebraic Roots movement very long, you've probably heard of the Shem Tov Matthew Gospel. So anything in blue is coming from the Shem Tov. So like if you were to actually go to the text where he recreated the gospel, you can see that there's a lot of the blue. So like he went into, he took a Greek text, an open source Greek, English translation of the Greek text, and then he took the Shem Tov, Matthew, and he looked at the differences, and then when he looked at the difference of between the blue Shem Tov and the black English translation of the Greek, he then just kind of made the judgment: do I go with what Shem Tov says, or do I go with what the Greek says? And so I did follow his example there. I've got my own copy of the Shem Tov, and so I referred to this. I used this to do my own Hebrew gospel according to the Hebrews restoration. So I followed his example. I like the way he did it. I don't know that there's a lot of differences between what I came up with and what he did. But you can see how much of the blue was him using the Shem Tov. So like if you were to be reading the gospel of the Hebrews that I came up with, and you run across like a couple of words that are different than what you're used to reading in the Greek text that you would find in your Bible, the translation of the Greek text rather, then you're probably going to find it in the Shem Tov. That's probably where it comes from. If it is several sentences or an entire sentence, then it probably comes from this list of sources here of quotations from the gospel according to the Hebrews. So like here in the rock, here's where Joseph is describing the Magi showing up here in these verses. And so like if you were to look at chapter 2, and you would go to sources and Matthew chapter 2, then here is the description of the Magi arriving, and so that's where I got it here. So I just incorporated that into the text. So anyway, like that's so if you do have questions about it, if you start reading the gospel according to the Hebrews that I reconstructed, and I'll tell you how to get it in a moment. But if you're wondering like, okay, why is this text not matching up? Why is this not reading like it is in the Greek? Why is there this extra story about Joseph seeing the Magi? Then it's either going to be in the Shem Tov, or it's going to come from the sources of the Hebrews, of the gospel according to the Hebrews. Also, I kept the numbering system on the Matthew so that it matches the Greek. So if you'll notice, verse 9, verse 10, verse 10.1. So anything that's a 0.1, that is something that comes from the gospel according to the Hebrews. So I didn't go and just change the numbering system when I had to add something to the text. I preserved it so that verse 11 down here is still going to match the Greek verse 11. So anyway, I think that really kind of covers all my notes. If you want a copy of this, this book I put together, all these different texts, the full text of the Nazarene Acts, the full text of the popular sermons of Peter, also known as Clementine homilies. If you want this, you can download it for free. You can have it. I'm giving it away, not asking for any money for it. In fact, I ended up applying for a copyright on it, and the only reason I apply for a copyright is not because I want to sell it, but I just don't want anyone else to take it and try to sell it. I want to give it away. It's yours for free. You can have it in a PDF. I'll put a link in the description so that you can download it. Once you download the text, if you want this other file that has all the sources, the sources from the gospel according to the Hebrews, the quotations from the gospel according to the Hebrews, there's a link. It's not actually a link. You'll have to copy this little piece of text here from the editor's note, put it into a web browser, and you can download all the sources that I used for the Gospel according to the Hebrews. All the sources, all the references, and there's actually a couple of there's actually at the bottom of this document there's a couple of links that take you to web pages that also have quotations from the Gospel according to the Hebrews. Stanford Reeves books are mentioned down here, so if you want to find those and read those, you can. Like I said, they're $10 each. You just need volumes 1 and 2. I would just get volumes 1 and 2, and if you read those and you really want volume 3, then you can always buy it later, but I think you could probably get by with just the first 2 volumes. Also, this book, The Hebrew Gospel and the Development of the Synoptic Tradition by James R. Edwards. This actually is a book that I bought in the process of making this. It is a terrific book. It has 2 appendixes that are phenomenal. One appendix has all the citations that he could find for the Gospel according to the Hebrews, and it also has the entire Gospel of Luke, all the Semitisms marked in it. So like if you want to look at a verse in Luke to see if you think it may have come from the Gospel according to the Hebrews, you can actually look it up in his appendix, and it tells you if that's a section that seems to come from the Gospel according to the Hebrews. So if you want to do the research, I would start with Stanford Reeves stuff, and then if you don't find the answers you want there, then I'll probably go with this Gospel, the Hebrew Gospel and the development of the Synoptic Tradition. Both books are excellent. And like I've said, I put the same note here. Most of the changes to the text come either from Shem Tov, Hebrew, Matthew, or are imported from sections of Luke's Gospel. So there are parts of Luke's Gospel that I moved over into Matthew to do this Gospel according to the Hebrews. So, and there's a few verses that come from the Gospel of Thomas, but for the most part, it's it's these other sources. So, if you did get this book from Stanford Reeves, if you had any questions about where a particular line from my restoration comes from, you could probably find it in there somewhere. It just may not be in the same spot that Mr. Reeves put it in his version. And I do have a fairly high degree of confidence that if we ever do dig up an actual, real, legitimate copy of the Gospel according to the Hebrews at an archaeological site, I have a pretty high degree of confidence that you're going to find the same information in it as you would find in the reconstruction I did. Some of the text may be in a different spot. Like there may be something that I put in, chapter 4 of Matthew, but it turns out it's in chapter 8 or something. So it may be in the wrong location in my document, but I don't think there's anything in this reconstruction I did that's wrong. It just may be in the wrong spot in the text. But other than that, it reads pretty good, and I think it's a pretty good reconstruction, and I think it's trustworthy, to be honest with you. I plan on using it in videos to teach going forward. Like I said, it's yours. You can have it. You can give it to whoever you want. If you download it and you got a friend that you think might be interested in it, by all means, send it to them. You can give it to anyone you want. All I ask is you don't change it, and don't charge anyone for it. But other than that, you can give it to everybody you want. You got a website, you want to put it on your website for other people to download, do it. Let them have it. Let everybody have it. Just don't charge them for it, and don't go like changing it, and then because I don't want people thinking that I put something in there that maybe I didn't. But other than that, it's yours. You can disperse it as you want, or if you don't like it, you can always just throw it away and not use it. But I can tell you, I think it's pretty trustworthy, all the information that's in it. So anyway, I think that's it. So if you want to download this book, the rock of a sure foundation, the original New Covenant scriptures of Yeshua of Nazareth and the apostles, whom he chose, then there will be a link in the description of this video, and you can download it and read it, and let me know what you think. And if there is an interest, if people are wanting to get a print copy of it, I do know that there are some print-on-demand programs where, like, I know Amazon has one where I can put it on the print-on-demand, and if you want to get an actual hard copy of it, you could. I don't know how much they would charge you for it. If there's an interest in that, I can reformat it to where it will fit a book, because right now the text that you're going to download is formatted to fit on letter size paper, like 8.5 by 11. So if you did print it off, it would fit your paper. But if we were going to turn it into a book, it would need to be reformatted, and it would probably this book is a special format that I did just because it fits better in the videos, and it's almost 800 pages. I think the version that is formatted for 8.5 by 11 paper is like almost 600 pages. So I don't know how much, if we did the Amazon print on demand, I don't know how much they would charge for a 700 page book, but I would be willing to put it on there and let you guys buy it at cost, whatever Amazon charges, if there's an interest. So if you guys do read it and would like to have a actual hard copy, a paper copy of it, let me know. And if people are interested in it, I might try to do that and give you that for an option. So anyway, I guess that's all I really have at the moment to discuss. So I pray that this ends up being a blessing for you. I hope that you are as excited about it as I am. I think this is a great thing, and that's it. So thank you for listening. Shalom.